volume just because of the street noise, and hopefully we can keep our sound so everyone can hear. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Cumberland County Commissioner Vince DiFilippo, and I want to thank you all for joining us today for the dedication of the Dennis Marion Public Services Building. Joining us today are my fellow commissioners Jim Hertzler, Gary Eichelberger, and we also have former commissioners present today, Earl Keller and Rick Ravino. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. Also, we have Jack Carroll, the Executive Director of Cumberland Perry Drug and Alcohol, and from the Pennsylvania Department of Drug and Alcohol, Deputy Secretary Ellen DiDomenico and Mrs. Camille Marion. Ladies and gentlemen, to be honest, I did not know Dennis Marion. He left county employment before I took office back in 2016, but based on what I have heard about him and the people I have talked to about Dennis, I wish I would have known him. Dennis served the county for more than 30 years. He held several prominent positions in public service, including Director of the Drug and Alcohol Commission, Director of the Office of Mental Health and Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities, Director of Board of Elections, and as Chief Clerk of Cumberland County. Dennis then served as the Pennsylvania Deputy Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services from 2013 on. Dennis was also very committed to community service and served on many boards and committees. He obviously cared about people. We have a number of speakers here today, so I'd first like to introduce Commissioner Jim Hertzler. Jim.
Thank you, Vince. Dennis Marion epitomized to the fullest extent what it's like to be a public servant. And it is only fitting today that we recognize this gentle man, lifelong service to others by formally dedicating our county's Human Services building in his memory. I only had the privilege of serving with Dennis for a short time during my first term as county commissioner when he was tapped by the state for a higher level position in the State Department of Human Services. And I knew at the time that the state's gain would be Cumberland County's loss. I knew that because Dennis was not only a good tactician in navigating the complexities of our various programs and services, down into the weeds of the bureaucracy, but he had a laser-sharp understanding that at the end of the day, it was all about serving the legitimate needs of our citizens and making life better for people. Preparing for today, I caught up with the article that was written upon Dennis's departure after 31 years of service to the county, upon his acceptance of the position to lead the state as Deputy Secretary for Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services. It was Bill Finnerty, at the time our Director of Information Technology, who noted that in addition to serving as our county's chief clerk, the top administrative position in most counties, Dennis also held the title of COO, Chief Operating Officer. But to Bill, he revised Dennis's COO title to Chief Optimist Officer. And that's very fitting for a memory of Dennis Marion. Even faced with difficult challenges and divergent views on occasion, Dennis was a bridge builder, a consensus builder, who served with integrity, diligence, and compassion, always believing in a better tomorrow, always believing in the better angels of everybody that he came in contact with. Regardless of their status of life, he also believed that every person had value and deserved to be treated with dignity and respect. Dennis Marion served our county and his fellow citizens with honor, And while he left this earth too soon, his smile, his optimism, and his dedicated service to others lives on in the work that goes on in our county and in this building that we will formally dedicate to his memory today. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank you as well for being here. It's a very important occasion. I'm Gary Eichelberger, the commissioner who served the longest of the three with Dennis. So, in addition to my thanks, I'm going to ask you to indulge me a little bit, and I have a few more words, I guess, than the others, perhaps. So, apologies, especially to Camille. I also noticed Commissioner Ravino is here, and Rick, I think you should be up here. Commissioner Keller's here. I'd ask you to join us up here. I think that's very fitting for reasons most of you know. This is, to my knowledge, the first time any significant county-affiliated structure or asset has been named for an individual. So this is therefore an extraordinary event. It's fitting because Dennis was no ordinary individual. And when Commissioner Ravino and I appointed Dennis to serve as our chief clerk, it was during a time of significant turmoil in this county government. And we appointed him knowing his experience and his presence among county employees would have a calming effect, a steadying effect. What I personally failed to appreciate at that moment was the degree to which he was able to have an energizing effect on some of our best and brightest in county government, and not just in Cumberland County, but county governments elsewhere across this state. Dennis served by example, and in that he succeeded greatly as a powerful example of what is possible, and of what the Creator of all of us requires of us. So often we tend to forget that the answer to the scriptural question, am I my brother's keeper, is yes. Yes, you are. Dennis never lost sight of that admonition, and it showed in his actions every day. In preparing my remarks earlier this morning, I started with a list of the many, many positive traits that I saw in Dennis. It was an incredible list, but I decided the one trait I found most appropriate to focus on was, I believe, his most enduring trait. And speaking to people here beforehand, the word I heard most often was smart. Dennis was really smart. Well, true. But he was more than that. I think there was something that was much more important than that. Above all else, Dennis demonstrated a simple truth, that you can move mountains with an attitude of positive action. The fact is, he was, from everything we saw, a truly positive person. And that is not a small thing in an era of cuts and consolidations, where literally every day he was faced with the harsh reality that many needs would continue to go unmet, and many persons would never fully get what they needed to reach their potential or to realize their own dreams of a better future. When it might be easy to do otherwise, he maintained his empathy for people in a very personal sense, and he always found some way to make a bad situation better. I'm recalling specifically his efforts with families of many of our county's families struggling with needs of intellectual disabilities among their loved ones, and how convening a regular forum for them to discuss and to vent and to share and to network about their situations provided a valuable channel of frustrations, even when dollars were not going to be forthcoming from that effort. It wasn't a formal program, it wasn't a mandate, it was an idea that made sense to him, and that he devoted time and energy to simply because it could help. That positive nature is an attribute he consistently brought to his mission of service in all ways. He loved to throw himself into situations where he was supporting those inside our organization as much as serving his vision of service to those out in the community. I have been nothing short of impressed at how many folks of our Cumberland County family have characterized him as their teacher, their mentor. These people drew powerful, lifelong lessons from his engagement and his involvement. What a legacy. We're certainly a better county today, and continue to be, because of his service to us. The naming of this building seems so natural to those who knew him well and worked with him over the many years he served this government and his community. Much of what he did was centered appropriately in this building, with it being his home base. But he didn't park himself at a desk. His energies and the results of those energies were felt most far from this spot throughout this county. I think Dennis would be surprised by what's happening here today, maybe even a bit embarrassed. But he would also know that this naming is really about much more than just him as an individual. This naming and its ceremony, at its heart, is really for Camille, and it's for Anna. It's meant to say thank you. Thank you for sharing your husband, father, and friend with us. The demands we made on him were significant. Demands in time, the most valuable thing any one of us has to give. Time that often was time spent away from you. And the demands also were in the energies we took from him, and even in the considerable expectations and even frustrations that we sometimes heaped upon him. For those things, we are obligated to say thank you. I hope that every time you see this building and hear it mentioned, even in passing, it will serve as a reminder that you are not the only ones who knew how fortunate you were to have him. This naming is also for all those folks, past, present, and future, who, like Dennis, devote themselves and their life's work to the never-ending job of helping people in need. Many of you are here today, and we're really pleased that you're here for this. Dennis's level of commitment, energy, and talents to the challenges facing county government was nothing short of extraordinary. He was a man of honor and ethics, and my fellow commissioners and I are proud to commemorate his duty of service by naming the Dennis Marion Public Services Building, and we do so with the hope that those efforts he valued most will be noted as the foundations of our county government and honored through a legacy of continued service going forward by many for the benefit of all. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hirschler. Thank you, Commissioner Eichelberger. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker is Jack Carroll, who is the Executive Director of the Cumberland Perry Drug and Alcohol.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. This is a great occasion, a chance to celebrate a wonderful person, and your turnout is an indication of how many people he touched with his life. I was lucky enough to work with Dennis for over 30 years and worked pretty darn close with him, so I got to know him quite well. We first met back in 1981 when he was hired by the then county commissioners. It was Nelson Hunt, Jake Myers, and Rosemary Piper to be the director of the drug and alcohol program. And that started him. Then he launched on a 30-year plus career with the county. And during his tenure here, he did just about everything. I mean, he was the ultimate utility man. We took advantage fully of his leadership skills in many, many different ways. We were lucky to have him. He was truly unique, one of a kind. He came in here from the first with a burst of energy, a high energy guy, and very, very ambitious. He was always full of ideas, and he was challenging himself, but he was challenging us too. He was challenging those of us who worked with him. He was constantly willing to question the status quo in order to make things better. And for somebody who worked pretty closely with you, I can tell you, that got to be a little irritating at times. But he would patiently and persistently nudge us till we saw a different way of doing things. A former pastor of mine used to frequently say that God's work is intended to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. I think that's a pretty good testament to Dennis's approach. There were no sacred cows with him when it came to county projects or in his work with the state. And if he ever ran into an explanation of, well, we've never done it that way before, well, that just didn't cut it at all. Dennis's communication and management style was also unique. He was known for his creativity, thinking outside the box when it came to problem solving and developing new programs. He was famous for his various brainstorming strategies. I think it was one of those left brain artistic kind of things, you know. And I have to admit here too, he was so bright and so quick that I often felt left in the dust trying to figure out to keep up with him. The thing, though, that I admire most has already been mentioned about Dennis, and that is his extremely positive attitude and the very friendly and respectful, eminently respectful way that he treated everyone that he encountered. From a confused or sometimes angry client to a state dignitary. He managed to always look for, and he also managed to always find the best in other people. And it made those of us who worked with him better for the experience. As a friend and colleague of Dennis's, I really want to thank the county commissioners for your decision to rename this building in his honor. In addition to doing so much for Cumberland County, I know he also volunteered a whole lot of his time and his energy to his home community here in Carlisle. And to have a building right here in downtown Carlisle bear his name is an especially appropriate tribute to the man. As Gary mentioned, because Dennis was pretty humble, I'm sure he'd be embarrassed, uncomfortable with all this attention. But I like to think, and I also think what he would do, I know what he would do. He would try to deflect. Come on. Bob, can't you do something about that? No, thank you for your service. Dennis would probably try to deflect the attention and the praise to other people and share it, because that's the kind of person he was. But I do like to think that he would like this, that he would ultimately admit that it was a nice honor, and I very much hope that you and Anna like this, because it shows how much Dennis meant and really still means to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Our next speaker, is the Deputy Secretary, Ellen D. Domenico, from the Pennsylvania Department of Drug and Alcohol. Ellen.
I am truly humbled to be here today. I am one of many, many people who had the blessings of working with Dennis over his very long career. Maybe one of the folks worked with him closest at the end, and that gives me kind of a special perspective of everything that he had done during his long, long career. When you're this far down the agenda, you're not sure what's really left to say, but I would like to just make a couple of points. If Dennis were here with us, and I suspect he is in his own way, he would certainly be a bit embarrassed. But I also suspect he'd be scanning the crowd and trying to figure out his next move in terms of how he could use this opportunity to do something good for all of us. He would be looking around and saying, where are my colleagues? Where are those people who work for me? Where are those people I've worked beside? Where are those people who I work for? And how can I use this to put the right people together in the right kinds of venues to do something that will move this community and all of this good work forward? I think that he would be thrilled that people representing a number of different constituencies that he worked with were here in the crowd today. I think he would be overwhelmed by it, but he would also be really, really proud of that piece. It was really interesting to be with Dennis at the end of his very long and very, very incredible career, because he took every piece of that work that he had done over the years and used it again. He took every one of those relationships that he had made at some point in time and figured out where they fit. And for those of us that were privileged enough to think of him as our mentor and our teacher and our colleague, I rarely thought of him as my boss, although he was, because it was not the way he interacted with us. He really interacted with us in a very, very different way. But for that opportunity to have been a part of that world with him was really, really incredible. I have a really favorite quote that I think is really a quote that is epitomizes Dennis. Robert Kennedy said this, as you can imagine, many, many decades ago. Few will have the greatness to bend history, but each of us can work to change a small portion of events, and in the total of all those acts will be written the history of this generation. I think Dennis had a whole lot of little individual acts, and I think the history that he has written at the local and the state and even national level is something that we should all be celebrating today. It is an incredible, incredible legacy, and this building will help to be a part of what helps us all remember what that legacy is. Thank you.
Thank you, Ellen. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce Camille Marion.
I want to thank you all for coming today. Especially I want to thank the present commissioners for initiating this great honor for Dennis, and for the past commissioners, and for Dennis's colleagues at the county and colleagues at the state who came out today on what could have been a really nasty day. And for my friends and family, some of who drove great distances to get here, thank you. Thank you for coming to celebrate this. And I have to say, Commissioner Eichelberger was right that Dennis wouldn't like this. And the reason I know he wouldn't like this is because when the county so nicely did several goodbye parties for him when he was leaving, he never told me. He never invited me. He never told me. I came home and said, Dennis, it would have been nice. I mean, people would think I didn't want to show up. But, he just liked to keep it under the radar. So, I think he never wanted the focus on him. And really what you've heard here today is that the focus for Dennis was on every person in the institution. He believed that it was all about the people, the people that did the small jobs, not the head of the institution, because nothing would happen if you had to depend on the head of the institution. It was everybody that came together, and what was important for him was for all of those people to recognize the value. For him, it was like all the people on a team. Everyone had a place, and everyone had to work together, and you only went forward because you worked together. So those of you that have worked with Dennis for a lot of years will recognize this. Dennis's motto was small changes consistently over time to make an impact. And he lived by that, and he believed that. So, for those of you, and I know it's hard and it's tedious because you don't see the impact of what you've done, because it takes a long time. Those small changes over time. It takes a long time, and sometimes while you're at the job, you don't see it, but you have made an impact. So really, I want to thank all of you today for this great honor, and he would have liked this honor. So on behalf of Anna, who unfortunately couldn't be here today, we would like to say thank you for this, and it's a legacy that will continue. And it will continue because of all of you, the people that work for the county and for the state, and who make those small changes over time to impact others' lives. Thank you.
Camille, the Board of Commissioners has a proclamation and dedication to Dennis, and I'd like to ask my colleagues to come up, and would like to read in part what the proclamation says. Whereas Dennis had been a strong advocate of human services and the support of individuals in their communities, and was active in the collaboration and development of the criminal justice policy team, one of the first in the Commonwealth, along with numerous other programs. And whereas his implementation of the Public Safety Review Team, Human Services Policy Team, and Claremont Review Team now better serve the residents of Cumberland County. And whereas his level of commitment, energy, and talents to the challenges facing county government was extraordinary, particularly during our nation's economic downturn, which commenced in 2008, which was the same year he was appointed to the position of chief clerk. Now, Therefore, the Cumberland County Board of Commissioners hereby recognizes and celebrates the enduring dedication and faithfulness of Dennis Marion and has renamed the Human Service Building, which will forthwith be called the Dennis Marion Public Service Building, in his honor. Presented this 14th day of September from the Cumberland County Board of Commissioners. Camille, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we are now going to uncover the plaque in memory of Dennis. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you all for coming out and helping us celebrate the great work of our friend Dennis Marion. Again, I want to thank everyone who has come out today, present, past commissioners, and other folks as well. If you are available, please join us on the third floor for some light refreshments. And again, thank you all for coming out, and God bless you all. I'm sorry, I forgot one thing, folks. Please hang out here while we do the ribbon cutting. Now you may join us on the third floor.